Hello everyone. Today we are here to discuss a yet important vitamin, that is vitamin B9, which is folic acid. So, folic acid is a water soluble vitamin, and it is one such water soluble vitamin which can be stored in very little amount in the liver. So, we are going to talk about where this folic acid is utilized in our body, what are the different functions, how much it is required per day, and what are the different sources we can get this folic acid from. So, we are going to discuss all of that under these headings. We are going to see how much is required per day, how it is synthesized, can we synthesize in our body, it has to be activated. So, how does the activation process takes place? Then we are going to see the important functions of folic acid in our body, some clinical applications of the inhibitors of folic acid synthesis. Then we are also going to discuss about biochemical basis of symptoms of folic acid deficiency. Then we will talk about why and how this folic acid is important during the pregnancy. We will summarize everything and we will take a take-home message. We will start with what is the source of folic acid. So, in Latin, the folic acid is actually derived from folium, that is a leaf of a vegetable. That clearly shows that plant source is a major source of folic acid. We have green leafy vegetable. If someone consumes, the person will have the RDA for a folic acid, but it is also present in whole gram, cereals and pulses. But does only a plant source is an important source of folic acid? No, we have some animal source as well, like egg, liver are important source in animal origin. But if someone consumes a green leafy vegetable, just knowing that it is green leafy vegetable which gives us folic acid, we can meet the RDA for folic acid. Now, how much it is required? So, can consuming folic acid is enough? Yes, it is enough because the RDA is very small. It is required in a very small amount. You can see in the 200 micrograms. It is not milligrams, it is micrograms. That is very small amount of folic acid is required. Both male and female require around equal amount of folic acid. But as this in pregnancy and lactation, the folic acid the requirement increases. We can understand that how the requirement increases in pregnancy and in lactation, because there is another life developing inside a womb, and we will see how this folic acid is important during pregnancy and lactation in the little later slides. Where did it is absorbed? It is absorbed in the upper jejunum. So, normally if a person consumes a diet rich in folic acid and does not have any inhibitors in the GIT, there will be absorption happens in the upper jejunum. But there are some drugs which can alter or which can act as a barrier for folic acid absorption. We are going to see a little later which are the few drugs which can actually affect the absorption of folic acid. Now, coming to the functions, there are mainly three important functions of folic acid. First, it is required for the synthesis of purines and pyrimidines. As we know, purines are adenine, guanine. In DNA, pyrimidines is cytosine, thymine. In RNA, we have cytosine and uracil as a pyrimidine. Here we can see that the folic acid is required for purine pyrimidine synthesis, that is for synthesis of our nucleic acid. It is also required for the maturation of erythrocytes. We will see what happens if the folic acid is not there. We can see right here itself that maturation of erythrocyte will be affected, but what it can lead to, we shall see little later. It is also required for the early development of neural tube in the fetus, and if the folic acid is not there, it will affect the neural tube development, and we will see what happens if the folic acid is absent in the little later slide when we talk about the deficiency manifestation of folic acid. Now, when we see its structure, it is consist of three important compounds. We can say pyridine, PABA and glutamate. They link together and form a folic acid. Now, we will try to understand how it is synthesized in our body. Can we synthesize folic acid or can we not synthesize folic acid? We will see in this slide. So, as we discussed that it is the structure of folic acid is basically combination of pyridine, PABA and glutamate. All of these three in presence of an enzyme called as dihydrogenase synthetase, it can form folic acid. But this synthesis does not occur in human beings. It can happen only in microorganisms. But what about human beings? We cannot synthesize folic acid. That means we have to consume in the diet. But this folic acid, whether microorganisms are synthesizing it or we are consuming in the diet, this has to be converted to dihydrofolate and later to tetrahydrofolate. by action of a specific enzyme called as dihydrofolate reductase. It's a two-step process, the same enzyme being used in both these steps, and it also requires NADPH as a reducing equivalent. By now you will know that NADPH we get from HMP shunt, which is the major source of this reducing equivalent NADPH. But what is this tetrahydrofolate? Tetrahydrofolate is an active form of folic acid. It is a coenzyme of folic acid, and in many reactions in metabolism, this tetrahydrofolate will be converted into many different forms and will be utilized in the reactions. We shall see in the later slide what are the different forms of tetrahydrofolate is present and how or where exactly it is being used. Now let us see some inhibitors of folic acid. Now first of this is sulfonamide. Now earlier slide we had seen the pteridine, PABA and glutamate, together it forms folic acid. But sulfonamide acts as a PABA analog. And what does it do? It inhibits the synthesis of folic acid in bacteria. Because we as a humans, we consume folic acid in the diet. We cannot synthesize it. So PABA analog sulfonamide cannot inhibit folic acid synthesis in us because we do not synthesize it. It can only inhibit the folic acid synthesis in bacteria, and by inhibiting the particular enzyme dihydroprase synthetase, and therefore sulfonamide acts as an antibiotic. Let us see where exactly it inhibits. So this particular step is inhibited. That means no formation of folic acid, no formation of tetrahydrofolate, and as tetrahydrofolate is very important for purines and pyrimidine synthesis, that will not happen. So let us see the mechanism of how does this process takes place. So as we have discussed, the sulfonamide inhibit the dihydroprase synthetase. Therefore, the decrease in the synthesis of folic acid by bacteria. Now we know that folic acid has to be converted to tetrahydrofolate. So if folic acid is not there, there will be decreased availability of tetrahydrofolate for the synthesis of purines and pyrimidines. And we know purines and pyrimidines are important for the synthesis of our nucleic acid, that is DNA. Therefore, decrease in the rate of DNA synthesis, and finally, if there is a decrease in the rate of DNA synthesis, there will be no proliferation of the bacterial cells, and hence the bacteria will die. Therefore, it is used to treat bacterial infection. So sulfonamide is used to treat bacterial infections. What is the next inhibitor? The next inhibitor is methotrexate. It is a folic acid analog. So here methotrexate is used as an inhibitor in human beings. How does it do it? It inhibits the enzyme dihydrofolate reductase in human cells, and it is used to treat cancer, psoriasis and rheumatoid arthritis. Now it is also used there are also other inhibitors for dihydrofolate reductase, such as trimethoprim in some bacteria and perimethamine in some malarial parasite. Let us see which step it is inhibiting. So as we are talking about human beings, we can escape the microorganism part. That means as a human we are consuming this in the diet and it is converting into tetrahydrofolate. But methotrexate can inhibit these two steps by inhibiting dihydrofolate reductase. That means it will not allow the formation of tetrahydrofolate, which is an active form of folic acid. So if folic acid active form, that is tetrahydrofolate, is not there, the coenzyme form is not there. That means all the different metabolic reactions where tetrahydrofolate different forms are being used, that will be affected. And as we have discussed, that purine and pyrimidine synthesis will be affected, and hence therefore it can use to treat cancer or psoriasis. Now the next inhibitor of dihydrofolate reductase in a microorganism is trimethoprim in some bacteria and perimethamine in some malarial parasite. So this is the synthesis, the complete synthesis in microorganism, where this trimethoprim and perimethamine, they can also inhibit dihydrofolate reductase, and they act as in the treatment of malaria, or in some bacteria they can be used as a treatment. Now, as I was talking about in the beginning, that tetrahydrofolate is an active form of folic acid, and it has many different forms which is used in metabolism. We can see in this table that this tetrahydrofolate is used is for one carbon transfer reaction. That means transfer of one carbon in any of the reaction, this tetrahydrofolate is used for that one carbon transfer. Where are these reactions? So here there are different forms or derivatives of tetrahydrofolate, such as N10 formyl tetrahydrofolate required for the source of purine ring C2 and C8 of purine ring. It is also required, the N5-N10 methinyl tetrahydrofolate is required for purine synthesis. There are other forms such as methylene tetrahydrofolate, which is required for pyrimidine synthesis and metabolism of serine and glycine. So, as we discussed in the beginning that it is required for purine and pyrimidine synthesis, we can see here the different forms of tetrahydrofolate are being used for purine and pyrimidine synthesis. It is also required in the histidine metabolism as well as very important synthesis of methionine. Let us see just quick glimpse of where all these different derivatives of tetrahydrofolate is being used. So, first one you can see here, the N10 formyl tetrahydrofolate is required as a source for the purine ring, the C2 and the C8 of purine ring. The N10 formyl tetrahydrofolate contribute the C of this purine ring. The second one is N5-N10 methylene tetrahydrofolate, which is required for pyrimidine synthesis. Now, we can see here N5-N10 methylene tetrahydrofolate is required for the synthesis of deoxythymidine monophosphate, which is one of the pyrimidine. You can see here it is also required for the metabolism of serine and glycine. So, there are different forms of this tetrahydrofolate required in metabolism. Let us see some more. We can see that N5 formamino tetrahydrofolate is required in the histidine metabolism. And here, as I said, very important methionine metabolism, because methionine is the essential amino acid. It also synthesizes a very important compound called as S-adenosyl methionine, which is called as activated form of methionine, which is involved in the methyl transfer reaction. So, here in this particular step you can see that N5-methyl tetrahydrofolate is another derivative of tetrahydrofolate which is required in the methionine metabolism. And there is a big you can say understanding is there here that how the folic acid and vitamin B12 are related and how vitamin B12 deficiency can cause folate trap. So, as a curiosity you can read further that how vitamin B12 deficiency can cause the trap of folic acid, and it is not in the purview of this lecture. So, we will not discuss that in detail. So, folic acid deficiency. Now, we have already established that we do not synthesize folic acid as a human, we take folic acid in the diet. But this folic acid has to be converted into tetrahydrofolate to be utilized in the many different metabolic reactions and as important for one carbon transfer. It is also important for purine and pyrimidine synthesis, maturation of erythrocytes, and also to prevent the neural tube defect. So, what all different factors can cause folic acid deficiency? First, it can cause due to the impairment in the absorption of folic acid in the intestine, like some of the disease like sprue or celiac disease. It can also happen in the alcoholism, as alcohol affect the folic acid absorption. As I was talking in the beginning about some of the drugs in the GIT can affect the absorption, like anticonvulsant drugs like phenobarbital. It can affect the absorption of folic acid in the intestine. Then we also have the drug what we discussed. If someone is consuming methotrexate, then this drug can also affect dihydrofolate reductase and also affect the activation or formation of the active form of folic acid. So, the deficiency, or you can say this is very important, the deficiency may also occur during pregnancy. Why? Pregnancy and lactation, because the demand is high. If you are still consuming the same amount 200 microgram, but demand is 400 microgram, that means we are consuming half of it. Okay. So, the demand increases during pregnancy and lactation. Hence, if the mother or the person who is becoming mother is not consuming folic acid in the appropriate amount, then it will lead to the deficiency of folic acid during pregnancy and lactation. So, folic acid deficiency can cause macrocytic or megaloblastic anemia. So, there is a relation between folic acid and vitamin B12. So, how vitamin B12 deficiency can cause folic acid trap and lead to megaloblastic anemia, you will understand that in vitamin B12 chapter. So, macrocytic or megaloblastic anemia occur due to decrease in the DNA synthesis and cell division. As we have seen earlier that folic acid is a very important component of purine and pyrimidine synthesis. If purine and pyrimidine are basically helpful in the formation of nucleic acid. If folic acid is not there, then purine and pyrimidine synthesis will be affected, and hence the synthesis of DNA will be affected and the cell division will be affected. So, as we have seen in the beginning that folic acid is important for the maturation of RBCs, the RBC will not be mature if folic acid is deficient, and it will lead to big RBCs which are immature RBCs, they are called macrocytic or megaloblasts they are called. We will see later the blood picture, and you can appreciate that a big RBCs can be seen in the peripheral blood smear. The folic acid deficiency can also lead to, in pregnant women, a neural tube defect which is called as spina bifida. In the fetus, in the first month of the pregnancy, the neural tube there should be a closure of neural tube. If the neural tube is not properly closed, the backbone, the spinal cord will not be properly formed. As it is beyond the purview of this chapter about the spina bifida in detail, you can, as a curiosity, you can read about that how neural tube is basically formed and what is the role of folic acid in the neural tube. There are many different factors which help in the closure of neural tube. And folic acid, like one of the nutrition, is also very important. Like folic acid here is important for the closure of neural tube. If folic acid is deficient, the neural tube will not be properly closed and it can lead to neural tube defect which is called as spina bifida. Hence, women are advised to take folic acid supplements before conception to reduce the risk of spina bifida in the fetus. What is the mechanism here about this particular macroblastic or macrocytic or megaloblastic anemia? As we have seen, the folic acid is deficient. It will lead to decrease in the active form of folic acid, that is tetrahydrofolate, and decreases the availability of the tetrahydrofolate for the biosynthesis of purines and pyrimidine, as we have seen earlier. And if they are not there, then there will be decrease in the rate of DNA synthesis and cell division, and something which is rapidly dividing, bone marrow, will be mostly affected, and it can lead to macrocytic or megaloblastic anemia. So, this is the mechanism how macrocytic or megaloblastic anemia occur due to the folic acid deficiency. Now, you can appreciate in this picture that how in the peripheral blood smear you can see that there is a big nucleus can be seen. The DNA synthesis and protein synthesis are not in sync during folic acid deficiency. The protein synthesis occur, but in the nucleus the DNA synthesis is not happening properly because purine and pyrimidine synthesis is affected. So, this insynchrony between the nucleic acid synthesis and protein synthesis, you can see that it will lead to the immaturation of the RBC, and you can see this RBC as a macrocytic or a megaloblast in the peripheral blood smear. On the right hand side, you can see the neural tube defect. As I told in the beginning, that folic acid is important for the closure of neural tube. If folic acid is deficient, the neural tube will not be properly closed and it will lead to neural tube defect, that is spina bifida. So, there are many different kinds of spina bifida are there, and you can study about them little bit more in detail, that how along with folic acid, what are the other factors which are important for the proper closure of neural tube. And if those factors are not there, how the different kind of neural tube defects can occur. One such neural tube defect is spina bifida because of the deficiency of folic acid. So, taking all together, we will see the summary of this. First important thing, dietary requirement. We know in humans we have to take in the diet, and dietary source, if we remember green leafy vegetable as a dietary source, we can have the RDA of folic acid fulfilled by that. But there are other sources as well, as we have discussed in the beginning. It is required in very small amount and it is only required in micrograms. What are the biological functions? We discuss purine and pyrimidine metabolism, important for synthesis of DNA, maturation of RBCs, as well as prevention of neural tube defect. That means closure of neural tube. It is required for the closure of neural tube. What is the main coenzyme for it? The active form is tetrahydrofolate, and it is required for one carbon transfer reaction in different metabolic reactions which we have seen earlier. If we talk about deficiency risk, we have talked about that if it is deficient, it can lead to microcytic or megaloblastic anemia. It is required for the proper closure of neural tube, and if it is not there, it lead to neural tube defects such as spina bifida. Increased demand in pregnancy and lactation, and therefore more amount of folic acid has to be consumed during pregnancy and lactation. So, this makes supplementation essential for women in childbearing age. Clinical relevance, there are many inhibitors of folic acid metabolism such as sulfonamide in bacteria or in microorganisms. Methotrexate have a significant application in the treatment of cancer, rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis. It affects or it inhibits dihydrofolate reductase. Overall, to take home message, a very important vitamin, a water soluble vitamin, which is required in the adequate amount for during the conception, because critical folic dependent development occurs in the first week of fetal life. Therefore, all women of childbearing age are advised to consume folic acid, so that there will be reduction in the pregnancy which is affected by neural tube defect. Thank you. These are the different sources which we can, pictorial way we can understand that if we consume anything green related vegetable, we can have the enough amount of folic acid which will meet the RDA. Thank you.